The summer sun beat down on us as we loaded our bags into the SUV, ready for our long-awaited family trip. Richard, my husband of 35 years, barked orders like a drill sergeant. "Joanna, make sure you pack the cooler with enough drinks and snacks for the drive, and don't forget the maps and directions." I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to remind him that I'd been planning this trip for months. As usual, he assumed I'd handle all the logistics while he reaped the rewards. Sylvia, Richard's mother, emerged from the house, her face pinched in disapproval. "Are we ready to go yet? You know how I hate waiting." I forced a smile. "Just about. Michael and Rebecca should be here any minute." As if on cue, my son and daughter-in-law pulled into the driveway. Michael gave me a sympathetic look, well aware of the tension between his father and me. We piled into the SUV, and I settled into the passenger seat, ready for the long drive ahead. But as we merged onto the highway, I overheard a hushed conversation from the back. "Once we're settled at the cabin, we'll have that talk with Joanna," Sylvia murmured to Richard. My heart sank. Talk? What were they planning? Richard's voice was low, but I caught the gist. "It's for the best, Mother. She'll never see it coming." "See what coming?" A knot formed in my stomach as I realized they were conspiring against me on what was supposed to be a joyful family vacation. The drive passed in tense silence, punctuated only by Sylvia's occasional snide remarks. By the time we reached the cabin, my nerves were frayed. As we unloaded our bags, Richard pulled me aside. "Joanna, we need to talk." I steeled myself, determined not to show weakness. "About what?" He glanced around, his expression guarded. "Not here. Let's go for a walk." We strolled along a nearby trail, the evening shadows lengthening around us. Finally, Richard spoke. "Mother and I have been discussing our living situation. With her health declining, she needs more care than I can provide on my own." I nodded, unsure where this was leading. "We've decided it would be best if she moved in with us permanently. That way, you can take care of her needs." My jaw dropped. "You expect me to become a full-time caregiver for your mother, without even consulting me?" Richard's eyes hardened. "It's the logical solution. You're retired and I'm still working. Who else is going to do it?" I shook my head in disbelief. "And what about my needs, Richard? Don't those matter at all?" He scoffed. "Don't be so dramatic. This is what families do. We take care of each other." But his words rang hollow. In that moment, I realized our marriage had become a sham, a facade of obligation rather than love or respect. As we returned to the cabin, Sylvia greeted us with a smug smile. She knew exactly what was happening, and she relished her victory. That night, as I lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, my mind raced. How had I let things spiral so far out of control? When had I stopped being Richard's partner and become little more than a servant? I thought of the dreams I'd once had, traveling, pursuing hobbies, enjoying my retirement. All of it had been sacrificed on the altar of duty and obligation. But as the first rays of dawn peeked through the curtains, a newfound determination took root within me. I would no longer be a passive bystander in my own life. It was time to take a stand. The cabin's rustic charm did little to soothe my frayed nerves as we settled in for the night. Richard and Sylvia acted as if nothing was amiss, chatting amiably about the scenic views and plans for hiking the next day. Their nonchalance only fueled my growing sense of unease. After dinner, I excused myself and retreated to the bedroom I was sharing with Richard. Closing the door behind me, I sank onto the edge of the bed, my mind racing. What were they plotting against me, and why? Memories flooded back. The countless times I'd put my own dreams on hold to cater to Richard's needs, the way Sylvia had always treated me like an intruder in her precious son's life. Had I been so blinded by a misguided sense of duty that I'd missed the cracks in our family's foundation? A muffled voice from the living room snapped me out of my reverie. I strained to listen, recognizing Richard's hushed tones. "Can't go on like this, Mother. She's become a burden." My heart pounded in my ears as Sylvia's raspy voice responded. "I told you she was never good enough for my son. We need to take action before it's too late." Take action? A chill ran down my spine. Were they planning to get rid of me somehow? I crept closer to the door, pressing my ear against the wood. Their voices grew clearer, the words like knives twisting in my gut. "We'll have to be discreet," Richard murmured. "Michael can never find out the truth." My son's name sent a jolt through me. They were going to lie to him, to turn him against me. Tears stung my eyes as I realized the depth of their betrayal. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in shock and disbelief. When Richard finally entered the bedroom, his expression was carefully neutral. "You should get some rest," he said, avoiding my gaze. "Big day tomorrow." I watched him disappear into the bathroom, my mind whirling. I couldn't confront him, not yet. Not until I had a plan. That night, as Richard's soft snores filled the room, I lay awake, plotting my next move. I would not go down without a fight. These people who claimed to be my family had shown their true colors, and it was time I did the same. As the first rays of dawn peeked through the curtains, I felt a newfound sense of determination. No more playing the dutiful wife and mother. From now on, I would be the master of my own destiny. Over breakfast, I studied Richard and Sylvia, watching for any hint of their sinister intentions, but they maintained their facade of normalcy, discussing the day's activities as if nothing were amiss. "I thought we could go for a hike this morning," Richard suggested, his tone deceptively casual. "Get some fresh air before the heat sets in." I forced a smile, playing along for now. "Sounds lovely." As we set off into the woods, I hung back, allowing Richard and Sylvia to take the lead. Michael and Rebecca trailed behind, their hushed conversation a comforting backdrop. Sylvia's voice carried back to me, sharp and condescending. "Honestly, Richard, I don't know how you put up with her. She's dead weight, dragging you down." My fists clenched at her cruel words, but I remained silent, biding my time. Richard's response was muffled, but I caught the gist. "Don't worry, Mother. Soon she'll be out of our lives for good." A wave of anger washed over me, hot and consuming. How dare they? After everything I'd sacrificed, this was how they repaid me. In that moment, a plan began to take shape in my mind. A plan for revenge, for justice. They thought they could cast me aside like an unwanted burden? Well, they had another thing coming. As we reached a scenic overlook, I hung back, allowing the others to admire the view. While their backs were turned, I slipped away, retracing our steps back toward the cabin. It was time to take control of my life, once and for all. I watched Richard and Sylvia disappear down the hiking trail, their voices fading into the distance. As soon as they were out of sight, I sprang into action, hurrying back to the cabin. My heart pounded as I slipped inside, scanning the living area for any sign of their belongings. A leather briefcase sat on the coffee table, and I recognized it as Richard's. Without hesitation, I unzipped it, rifling through the contents. Financial statements, legal documents, and letters. My breath caught in my throat as I unfolded one, the looping handwriting unmistakably feminine. The words leapt off the page, searing into my brain. "My dearest Richard, our stolen moments together are all that sustain me." I stumbled back, the room spinning around me. An affair? After all these years of loyalty and sacrifice, he'd been unfaithful? Bile rose in my throat as I continued reading, the sordid details laying bare the depth of his betrayal. And there were more letters, each one more damning than the last. Tears blurred my vision as I turned to the financial records, my hands trembling. Line after line of unexplained expenditures and hidden accounts, proof that Richard had been bleeding our savings dry right under my nose. The sound of laughter drifted in from outside, and I froze, panic gripping me. Michael and Rebecca must have returned from the hike. I had to act fast. Snatching up the incriminating evidence, I raced to the bedroom and began stuffing my belongings into a suitcase. My mind raced, formulating a plan. I couldn't confront Richard and Sylvia here, not with Michael caught in the crossfire. No, I needed to get away, to gather my strength and decide my next move. As I zipped up the suitcase, a familiar voice called out from the living room. "Mom, are you in here?" "Michael?" My heart clenched at the concern in his tone. He deserved to know the truth, but not yet. Not until I was ready to face the fallout. "I'm just resting, honey," I called back, willing my voice to remain steady. "I'll be out in a bit." Silence, then the murmur of Rebecca's soothing tones as she ushered him away. Bless that girl for her intuition. With shaking hands, I scribbled a hasty note, tucking it into Richard's briefcase along with the damning evidence. Then, gripping my suitcase tightly, I slipped out the back door and into the waiting rental car. As I peeled out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of Michael and Rebecca on the porch, their expressions puzzled. A pang of guilt twisted in my gut, but I pushed it aside. They would understand in time. For now, I had a mission: to gather the strength and resources I'd need to bring my husband and his vile mother to their knees. They thought they could discard me like a worn-out rag? Well, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The miles stretched out before me, and with each one I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. No more playing the dutiful wife, the obedient daughter-in-law. From this moment on, I would be the master of my own destiny. And Richard and Sylvia? They were going to pay for every single slight, every betrayal, every ounce of disrespect they'd heaped upon me over the years. I would see to that, no matter what it took. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I allowed a grim smile to crease my lips. The game was on, and they had no idea what was coming for them. I drove in a daze, the miles blurring together as I put distance between myself and that wretched cabin. My hands shook on the steering wheel, a potent mix of anger and adrenaline coursing through my veins. How could he? How could Richard betray me like this after everything we'd been through? The letters burned in my mind, their sordid details searing into my brain like acid. And Sylvia, that vile woman, had been in on it the whole time, no doubt reveling in my humiliation. Well, they were going to regret the day they ever crossed me. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, I pulled into a nondescript motel, my body thrumming with nervous energy. I needed to regroup, to formulate a plan for my next move. The dingy room did little to calm my frayed nerves, but I forced myself to take deep breaths, willing my racing heart to slow. Sinking onto the sagging mattress, I reached for my phone with trembling fingers. Richard's number glared back at me from the screen, and a bitter laugh escaped my lips. Oh, how the tables had turned. No more would I be the obedient little wife scurrying to answer his every beck and call. This time, he would be the one squirming, forced to face the consequences of his actions. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. Just as I was about to hang up, his gruff voice crackled over the line. "Joanna, where the hell are you? Your son is worried sick." I bristled at his tone, that familiar mix of condescension and entitlement. Not anymore. "Save it, Richard," I spat. "I know everything. About the affairs, the money you've been siphoning off. I have proof." Silence, thick and heavy, stretched between us. Then a low chuckle that sent ice shooting through my veins. "So what?" he sneered. "You really think anyone will believe the ramblings of a bitter, delusional old woman?" White-hot rage licked at my insides, but I forced myself to remain calm, to keep my voice level. "I'm not the one who's delusional, Richard. You and your mother have been playing me for a fool for far too long. Well, those days are over." Another pause, and when he spoke again, his words were laced with venom. "You ungrateful bitch, after everything I've done for you, for this family? You're going to regret this." A harsh laugh burst from my lips. "No, Richard, you're the one who's going to regret it. Every single lie, every betrayal, every ounce of disrespect you've heaped upon me, you're going to pay for it all. I promise you that." His response was a torrent of profanity and vitriol, but I barely heard it. A sense of grim determination had settled over me, hardening my resolve. "Don't bother coming after me," I warned, cutting off his tirade. "And if you know what's good for you, you'll keep your distance from our son. This is just the beginning, Richard. The gloves are off now." With that, I ended the call, a strange sense of calm washing over me. For the first time in decades, I felt in control of my own destiny. Grabbing a pen and paper, I began to make a list: names, numbers, resources. I would need allies in the battle to come, people I could trust to have my back. Jane, my oldest and dearest friend, would be the first. She'd been urging me to leave Richard for years, and I knew she would be in my corner without question. Next, a lawyer, a shark in the courtroom who could help me navigate the legal quagmire that was sure to come. I had evidence of Richard's misdeeds, but I would need an expert to ensure it stuck. As the list grew, I felt a newfound sense of purpose taking root within me. No more would I be the downtrodden, disrespected wife. Richard and Sylvia had awoken a sleeping giant, and they were about to feel the full force of my wrath. A grim smile tugged at my lips as I made the final entry on the list. Michael. My son. My rock. The one person in that twisted family who had always had my back. It was time to bring him into the fold, to let him know that the games were over. Together, we would take down the Machiavellian forces that had been working to destroy us. And when the dust settled, well, let's just say Richard and Sylvia would be the ones regretting the day they ever crossed Joanna Henderson. I pulled up to Michael and Rebecca's cozy bungalow, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. The moment of truth. Would my son understand the agonizing decision I'd made, or would he side with his father, blinded by years of manipulation? Taking a deep breath, I gathered my things and made my way to the front door, my knuckles rapping against the weathered wood. Seconds ticked by like hours before Rebecca's smiling face appeared. "Joanna, we were so worried when you took off like that. Come in, come in." Her cheerful demeanor faltered as she took in my haggard appearance, the suitcase clutched in my white-knuckled grip. "Is everything okay?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words stuck in my throat. Michael's concerned voice drifted in from the living room. "Mom, is that you?" He rounded the corner, and I saw the moment the truth dawned on him. The suitcase, my red-rimmed eyes, the grim set of my jaw. His expression shifted from confusion to dread. "What's going on? Where's Dad?" Rebecca laid a gentle hand on his arm, her gaze flicking between us. "Why don't we all sit down?" We settled onto the plush sofa, an oppressive silence hanging in the air. Michael's eyes bored into me, pleading for an explanation. Drawing a shaky breath, I began to speak, the words tumbling out in a torrent. "Your father, he's been unfaithful, Michael, for years, by the looks of it. And not just that, he's been bleeding our finances dry, funneling money into secret accounts." Michael's brow furrowed as he processed my words. "What? That can't be right. Dad would never." His voice trailed off as I pulled out the crumpled letters, the bank statements detailing the missing funds. Wordlessly, I handed them over, watching as his eyes scanned the damning evidence. "Oh, Mom." His shoulders slumped, and I saw the exact moment the truth hit him, like a physical blow. "I'm so sorry." Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away, straightening my spine. "That's not all, honey. Your grandmother was in on it. They were planning to force me out, to make me your father's full-time caregiver while he carried on with God knows who." Rebecca's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room as Michael digested this latest bombshell. His expression darkened, and I recognized the flicker of anger in his eyes. Anger on my behalf. "Those bastards," he muttered, his fists clenching. "How could they do this to you, to our family?" I reached out, covering his hand with mine. "It doesn't matter now. What's done is done. I've made my decision. I'm leaving your father. I can't live like that anymore, constantly disrespected and manipulated." A muscle ticked in Michael's jaw as he processed my words. I could see the war raging within him, the desire to support me, battling against years of ingrained loyalty to his father. Finally, he met my gaze, his eyes shining with a fierce determination that made my heart swell with pride. "You're right, Mom. This ends now. Dad and Grandma," he shook his head, jaw clenched. "They've gone too far this time. I'm with you, 100%. Whatever you need, I'm here." A weight lifted from my shoulders as Rebecca nodded her agreement, squeezing Michael's hand. In that moment, I knew everything would be okay. With my son and his wife in my corner, I could weather any storm Richard and Sylvia threw my way. Reaching out, I pulled Michael into a fierce embrace, blinking back grateful tears. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for believing me, for having my back." As I held my son close, I felt a newfound sense of strength coursing through me. The path ahead would be rocky, but I was no longer alone. With Michael and Rebecca by my side, I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Richard and Sylvia had made a grave miscalculation. They had underestimated the bond between a mother and her child, and now they would pay the price for their betrayal. The war had begun, and I had no intention of losing. With Michael and Rebecca's unwavering support, I felt a newfound sense of strength and determination. It was time to reclaim my life, to shed the shackles of Richard and Sylvia's manipulation once and for all. The first order of business was finding a place of my own, a sanctuary where I could begin to heal and plan my next steps. Michael insisted on helping me search, and within a week, we'd found the perfect little apartment in a quiet neighborhood. As I unpacked my belongings, filling the bare shelves and walls with pieces of my life, a weight seemed to lift from my shoulders. This was my space, my refuge from the toxicity that had plagued me for far too long. Of course, Richard didn't take my departure lying down. He showed up at Michael's doorstep, red-faced and bellowing, demanding to know where I was. "She's your mother, for God's sake," he raged at Michael. "You're supposed to be loyal to your family, not that ungrateful harpy." But Michael stood firm, his jaw set in that stubborn line I knew so well. "Mom's the only family I need right now. You and Grandma have done enough damage." Richard's eyes narrowed, and I could see the gears turning in his mind, searching for a way to regain control. "Don't be so quick to judge, son. You haven't heard the full story." "I've heard enough," Michael shot back. "Mom showed me the letters, the bank statements. I know exactly what kind of man you are." For a moment, Richard faltered, his bravado slipping. Then his expression hardened, and he jabbed a finger in Michael's face. "Mark my words, you're going to regret this. When your mother's lies come crashing down around her, don't come crawling back to me." With that, he turned on his heel and stormed off, leaving a ringing silence in his wake. Michael's shoulders slumped, and I could see the toll this was taking on him. Crossing the room, I pulled him into a fierce hug. "Thank you," I murmured. "Thank you for standing by me." He returned the embrace, his voice thick with emotion. "Always, Mom. I'm with you till the end." In the weeks that followed, I focused on settling into my new life, unpacking, decorating, exploring my neighborhood. With each passing day, I felt a little more like myself, the weight of Richard and Sylvia's toxicity slowly lifting from my shoulders. Of course, they didn't make it easy. Richard bombarded me with calls and texts, alternating between pleading for me to come home and hurling vicious insults. Sylvia was no better, leaving scathing voicemails that made my blood boil. But I stood firm, bolstered by Michael and Rebecca's constant support. I knew that if I wavered, even for a moment, Richard would seize the opportunity to reel me back in, and I refused to let that happen. Not after everything I'd been through. The final straw came a few months later when Michael called me in a panic. "Mom, you need to get over here. Dad's gone off the deep end." I raced over to find Richard ranting and raving on Michael's doorstep, his face contorted with rage. "You're making a huge mistake, siding with that lying witch," he spat as I approached. "She's poisoned you against your own family." Sylvia hovered nearby, wringing her hands and shooting me venomous glares. For once, I felt no fear, only a simmering anger at the way they continued to try and manipulate us. Planting myself in front of Richard, I met his glare head-on. "That's enough. You've had your chance to tell your side of the story, and Michael hasn't bought your lies. It's over, Richard. We're done." His face purpled with rage, and for a moment I thought he might strike me. But Michael stepped forward, his broad frame imposing. "You heard her, Dad. It's time for you to leave, and if you can't respect our decisions, you're no longer welcome here." The fight seemed to go out of Richard all at once. His shoulders slumped, and he shot me one last withering glare. "Have it your way, but don't come crying to me when this all blows up in your face." As he and Sylvia retreated, I felt an immense sense of relief wash over me. That chapter of my life was finally closed, the shackles of their manipulation broken for good. Turning to Michael, I pulled him into a fierce hug, blinking back grateful tears. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything." He held me close, his voice thick with emotion. "You've got nothing to thank me for, Mom. You're the strongest person I know." And in that moment, I knew it was true. Richard and Sylvia had done their damnedest to break me, but I had emerged from the ashes, stronger and more resilient than ever before. At long last, I was free. With Richard and Sylvia finally out of our lives, Michael, Rebecca, and I were able to find some semblance of peace, but I knew it wouldn't last. Not with the way they had been carrying on. Sooner or later, they would try to reassert their twisted control over the family. My chance for closure came a few months later, when Emma's 85th birthday rolled around. Despite the strained relations, Sylvia still expected the entire clan to gather and celebrate. I could only imagine the venom she would spew if Michael and I failed to show. Part of me wanted to take the high road, to let the past be the past. But a larger part, the part that had endured decades of disrespect and manipulation, craved justice. This would be my opportunity to expose Richard and Sylvia's misdeeds before the entire family. So with Michael and Rebecca's support, I agreed to attend the party. As we made our way to Sylvia's sprawling estate, I could feel the tension crackling in the air, thick as soup. Emma greeted us at the door, her perpetual sneer firmly in place. Well, well, if it isn't the prodigal daughter-in-law, she sneered. I must say, you've got a nerve showing your face here after the way you've treated my sister. I opened my mouth to respond, but Michael beat me to it, his voice low and dangerous. That's enough, Aunt Emma. We're here to celebrate your birthday, not listen to your venom. Her eyes widened at his tone, but she stepped aside, allowing us to pass. The gathering was already in full swing, with clusters of well-heeled guests milling about, sipping cocktails and making polite small talk. Sylvia spotted us immediately, her face contorting into a rictus of rage. She started toward us, no doubt intending to unleash a torrent of abuse, but Richard caught her arm, whispering urgently in her ear. For a moment, I thought they might cause a scene right then and there. But Sylvia seemed to rein in her temper, shooting me a look of pure venom before plastering on a sickly sweet smile. "Joanna, darling, how lovely of you to join us," she simpered, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "And Michael, Rebecca, we're just delighted to have you here." The undercurrent of menace was palpable, but I refused to be cowed. Lifting my chin, I met her gaze head-on. "Thank you for the invitation, Sylvia. It's been too long since we've all gotten together as a family." Her eyes narrowed at my pointed emphasis on the word family, but she said nothing. Richard, however, couldn't resist taking a jab. "Yes, well, some of us have a rather skewed definition of what family means, don't we, dear?" The barb was clearly aimed at me, but I refused to rise to the bait. Instead, I excused myself, making my way toward the bar. If I was going to drop this bombshell, I needed a drink first. As the evening wore on, I bided my time, watching as Richard and Sylvia worked the room, schmoozing and preening like the arrogant snobs they were. Emma, too, held court from her throne-like chair, lording over the proceedings with her usual disdain. Finally, as the cake was being served, I saw my opportunity. Rising from my seat, I clinked my glass, calling for attention. "If I could have everyone's attention, please." The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward me. Richard and Sylvia's expressions were guarded, but I could see the unease flickering in their eyes. Drawing a deep breath, I began to speak, my voice ringing out loud and clear. "I want to thank Emma for including me in this wonderful celebration. It's been far too long since we've all been together as a family." I paused, letting the weight of that word sink in. Sylvia's eyes narrowed, but I pressed on. "Of course, I use that term loosely, because while we may be bound by blood and marriage, the sad truth is that this family has been rotting from the inside for years." A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd, and I saw Richard tense, his face flushing an angry crimson. But I was on a roll now, the words pouring forth in an unstoppable torrent. "You see, for decades I've endured the cruelty and manipulation of my dear husband and mother-in-law, the emotional abuse, the financial betrayals, the utter lack of respect for me as a human being." Gasps and scandalized whispers filled the air as I laid it all bare. The affairs, the hidden bank accounts, their plans to force me into indentured servitude as Richard's caregiver. By the time I finished, Sylvia's face was ashen, her carefully cultivated facade crumbling around her. Richard, too, looked shell-shocked, as if he couldn't quite believe I'd had the audacity to expose his sins before his entire social circle. For a long, charged moment, the room was utterly silent. Then, like a dam bursting, the outrage and condemnation came pouring forth. "How could you, Richard? Sylvia, you wretched woman! And to think we welcomed you into our homes!" The voices swirled around us, a cacophony of judgment and disdain. Sylvia shrank back, her eyes darting wildly, searching for an ally, a friendly face. But there were none. Even Emma had turned her back, her lips pursed in a thin, disapproving line. As the tumult raged on, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The shackles of shame and secrecy had finally been cast off, the truth laid bare for all to see. Crossing the room, I came to stand before Richard and Sylvia, looking them square in the eye. "It's over," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "Your lies, your manipulations, they've all been exposed. You have no power over me or this family any longer." Sylvia opened her mouth, no doubt to hurl some scathing insult or empty threat. But the words seemed to die in her throat as she took in the scene around her, the accusatory glares, the whispers of disdain. In that moment, I saw the fight go out of her, that indomitable spirit finally broken. She was a fallen queen, her reign of terror at an end. Turning on my heel, I strode from the room, head held high, Michael and Rebecca at my side. As we emerged into the cool evening air, I felt an immense weight lift from my shoulders. At long last, I was free of their toxic influence, their twisted games. And while the road ahead would be long, I knew that I would walk it with strength and dignity, unbowed and unbroken. Revenge, as they say, is a dish best served cold, and oh, how sweet it tasted. In the aftermath of Emma's disastrous birthday party, a strange sense of calm settled over me. For the first time in decades, I was free from the constant weight of Richard and Sylvia's manipulation, their toxic influence finally purged from my life. Of course, they didn't go quietly into that good night. Richard bombarded me with calls and emails, alternating between groveling pleas for forgiveness and vitriolic tirades against my supposed betrayal. Sylvia, too, made her fair share of attempts to reassert her control, leaving scathing voicemails that I promptly deleted without listening. But I was done engaging with their drama, their twisted mind games. I had laid bare the truth for all to see, and in doing so, I had regained my power, my sense of self-worth. With Michael and Rebecca's support, I focused on building a new life for myself, one free from the shackles of my past. I found a quaint little apartment in a charming neighborhood, filling it with pieces that brought me joy. Fresh flowers, cozy throws, framed photos of happier times. And as the weeks turned to months, I began to venture out, to rediscover the world beyond the confines of my toxic marriage. I joined a book club at the local library, losing myself in the stories of other resilient women who had faced and overcome their own struggles. I volunteered at a nearby soup kitchen, finding solace in the simple act of serving others. Slowly but surely, I began to heal, to reclaim the parts of myself that had been buried for far too long. The anger and bitterness that had once consumed me gave way to a newfound sense of peace, of contentment. Of course, Michael and Rebecca were a constant source of strength and support throughout this journey. They insisted on regular family dinners, filling my little apartment with the sounds of laughter and love. And when Rebecca gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, I was there every step of the way, reveling in the joy of becoming a grandmother. As I cradled that tiny bundle in my arms, gazing into her innocent eyes, I made a silent vow. This child would never know the pain and manipulation that had plagued my own family. She would grow up surrounded by love and respect, her spirit nurtured and cherished. In those quiet moments, rocking my granddaughter to sleep, I found a sense of peace and purpose that had eluded me for far too long. This was what truly mattered, not the petty squabbles or toxic power plays, but the simple joys of family, of unconditional love. And if Richard and Sylvia ever dared to darken our doorstep again, to try and taint this newfound happiness with their venom, well, they would quickly learn that I was no longer the meek, downtrodden woman they had once taken such delight in tormenting. No, I was a phoenix risen from the ashes of my past, stronger and more resilient than ever before. And I would protect this fragile new life with every fiber of my being, come what may. As the years passed, Richard and Sylvia's attempts at contact grew fewer and farther between. Whether they had finally accepted defeat or simply moved on to tormenting some other poor soul, I neither knew nor cared. They were ghosts of my past, shadows that held no power over me any longer. My focus remained firmly on the present, on cherishing each precious moment with my son, my daughter-in-law, and my beautiful granddaughter. We became a tight-knit clan, bound not by blood or obligation, but by a deep, abiding love and respect. And in those quiet moments, as I watched my family blossom and thrive, I knew that I had won the ultimate victory. Not through rage or vengeance, but through the simple act of living my life on my own terms, unbowed and unbroken. Richard and Sylvia had tried their damnedest to crush my spirit, to strip me of my dignity and self-worth. But in the end, it was their hatred, their pettiness, that had withered and died like a noxious weed starved of sunlight. As for me, I had risen from the ashes, a towering lily in full bloom, my fragrance carrying on the wind as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And that, I knew, was the greatest revenge of all. In a world where I thought love was a language I'd never speak, his words, "Would you consider going out with me?" struck a chord I never knew I had. I stared blankly at Jude, stunned by his bold invitation. Me, the office recluse, being asked out by one of our most personable clients. It seemed unfathomable. I know this seems out of the blue, he continued with a warm smile, but I've wanted to get to know you better for a while now. You intrigue me. I felt my cheeks flush as I scrambled for words. My instinct was to politely decline and retreat to my safe solitary office, but something in his gentle eyes chipped away at my guarded facade. I'd love to, I managed, the words escaping before I could overanalyze their implication. His face lit up with pleasant surprise. Yeah, great. Are you free Friday night? I nodded, suddenly feeling shy as scattered memories of high school dances and my college roommates' many suitors flashed through my mind. My scant romantic history felt woefully inadequate preparation for an evening alone with Jude. As we exchanged numbers, planning the location and time, apprehension and excitement dueled within me. I had always admired Jude from afar, drawn to his affable confidence and easy charm. But I never imagined his interest would extend to someone like me, the office introvert who preferred headphones and spreadsheets to happy hours with colleagues. That Friday evening, I agonized over my outfit, changing 3 times before settling on a simple black dress and heels. I barely recognized my reflection, a far cry from the jeans and blouses I lived in at the office. As the Uber approached the restaurant, my nerves kicked into overdrive. You can do this, I told myself. Just make conversation. I was greeted by the scent of grilled meat and raucous laughter as I walked through the doors. The buzz of a Friday night crowd set my anxiety on edge. But then I spotted Jude waving at a small table nestled in a quiet corner. His smile eased my tension. You look beautiful, he said, pulling out my chair. I lowered myself down, smoothing my dress self-consciously. This place is really nice. Do you come here a lot? I asked. As we fell into casual banter about local restaurants, my nervousness gradually gave way. Jude's presence was disarming, engaged but relaxed, funny but thoughtful. Our conversation drifted seamlessly from work to hobbies to childhood memories over steak frites and wine. I barely touched my food, too caught up in his entertaining stories to think about eating. Jude jumped from topic to topic with enthusiastic ease, while I mainly listened, interjecting occasional questions or reactions. Despite my tendency to avoid eye contact, I found myself stealing glances at his bright amber eyes as he spoke. After the plates were cleared, Jude glanced at his watch. I didn't mean to keep you so late. I know it's a work night. Oh, that's okay, I said quickly. In truth, I had barely noticed the passing hours in his company. As we walked out to catch our Ubers, Jude gently brushed his hand against mine. The subtle contact sent a spark through my skin. I had a wonderful time, Alara, he said softly. Would you want to go out again next weekend? I nodded, suddenly unable to find my voice. As my Uber pulled up, Jude leaned in, planting a delicate kiss on my cheek. Good night, he whispered before turning to leave. I watched him disappear into the night, my fingers touching the spot his lips had grazed. The chord he struck within me now hummed with new life. I knew in that electric moment that my world would never be the solitary place it once was. Our bliss lasted only a few short years before life threw its first major obstacle at us. Barely 2 years into our marriage, Jude's promising startup collapsed almost overnight, the victim of embezzlement by a duplicitous business partner. I still remember Jude's ashen face when he told me the news over the phone. It's all gone, Alara. Everything. His voice cracked as he explained how his conniving co-founder had drained their accounts before disappearing without a trace. My heart ached for my kind-hearted husband, knowing how much blood and sweat he had poured into his company. I rushed to meet him, enveloping his slumped frame in my arms. I'm so sorry, Jude, I whispered, holding him tightly. We'll get through this. I promise. In the months that followed, we slowly adjusted to our new financial reality. The lease on our trendy apartment was not renewed. Designer brands and upscale restaurants were replaced with thrift stores and home cooking. Jude fell into a period of despair, struggling to pull himself out of bed most mornings, much less send out job applications. Eventually, our dwindling savings forced my hand. One late night, Jude came home to find me sitting solemnly at our kitchen table. We can't avoid it anymore. One of us needs a steady job with benefits, I said gently. Jude stared at the floor silently before sinking into the chair across from me. I know, he finally replied, his voice laced with shame. I'm trying, Alara. These past few months have been difficult. I reached for his hand reassuringly. Let me job hunt for a while. My background may make it easier for me to find something quickly. Though it wounded his pride, Jude eventually conceded. Within a few weeks, I leveraged my financial analysis skills into a mid-level position at a thriving corporation. Meanwhile, Jude half-heartedly submitted applications, his enthusiasm still dampened. Upon receiving my first paycheck, I surprised Jude with dinner at our favorite upscale restaurant, but instead of delighting him, the extravagant evening seemed to underscore his feelings of failure. We can't afford this, Alara, he said sullenly, eyeing the polished surroundings. Not on an administrative assistant's salary. Stung by his thoughtless words, I bit my tongue to restrain a retort. Later, I tried gently broaching his comment, but Jude refused to discuss it further. As I drifted to sleep that night, an uneasy feeling stirred within me. The dynamics of our relationship were shifting, but to what end I did not yet know. Over the next year, Jude cycled through short-lived contract jobs while my career advanced rapidly. Each of my promotions and pay raises seemed to drive the wedge between us in deeper. Pleasant dinners would suddenly flip into moody silences if I mentioned work. Offhand comments about my lucky break stung. But Jude's biggest blow came on the heels of my latest achievement, a senior manager role that nearly doubled my prior income. I arrived home thrilled to share the good news, only to find Jude pacing angrily. I can't keep doing this, he erupted before I could even speak. Watching you succeed so effortlessly while I flounder. Why did I bother with college when you make twice my income without even trying? I stood speechless, stricken by his verbal attack. Jude, that's not fair, I finally responded, fighting back tears. My job requires 80-hour weeks and extensive travel. You know I would happily trade places. Oh, please, he scoffed. You love the fancy office and business trips. Don't pretend this hasn't been the best thing that ever happened to your career. As his cruel words echoed through our silent apartment, an image of the gentle man I married flickered in my mind. The man now standing before me, twisted by envy and pride, felt like a stranger. My heart broke realizing the Jude I loved may be gone forever. The months following Jude's outburst dragged on, our relationship strained by unspoken hurts. My demanding job kept me traveling frequently, leaving little time to mend the widening rift between us. During a rare extended stay home, I was surprised to find a sharply dressed Jude waiting with 2 glasses of wine when I returned one evening. Congratulations are in order, he declared, handing me a glass. I started a new position today, at Richardson Financial. I stared blankly, struggling to process this sudden news after so many months adrift. Jude continued explaining his role as a junior broker at the prestigious firm while I nodded mutely. This is wonderful news, I finally managed. What prompted you to apply there specifically? Jude refilled our glasses, his mood buoyant. I realized I couldn't sulk forever, and I know Richardson was on your dream company's list from business school. I detected an unspoken message in his pointed remark. By choosing a firm I admired, perhaps Jude hoped to prevent any envy on my part. I brushed the implication aside, focusing on my relief at this positive development. Over celebratory pasta, Jude enthusiastically outlined his plans to quickly climb the corporate ladder. I smiled encouragingly, though uncertainty lurked at the back of my mind. Jude's checkered employment history left me skeptical of his staying power in the notoriously cutthroat environment, but I kept silent, not wanting to dampen his fledgling confidence. Well, I'm off to bed, Jude said, kissing my cheek after dinner. 5 a.m. comes early when you actually have somewhere to be. I awoke the next morning to find Jude already gone. A quickly scrawled note on the counter wished me a nice day. As I surveyed the remnants of last night's feast, I felt a palpable emptiness. I longed for the days when lazy Saturday mornings meant lingering in bed together before tackling chores or enjoying leisurely brunch dates. Over the next few months, Jude and I mostly passed like ships in the night. My global travel increased substantially with a major product launch, leaving me perpetually jet-lagged. Meanwhile, Jude rapidly advanced at Richardson Financial, regularly working 12-plus-hour days. We traded quick voicemails and the occasional takeout dinner, too exhausted for meaningful interaction. But slowly, our financial state improved with Jude's rising income. We moved into a more spacious apartment closer to Richardson's headquarters. Jude leased a shiny BMW to match his new professional persona. My pay bumps had bought us time, but now Jude's earnings afforded us true stability. I noticed small changes, too. Jude's expensive haircuts, new custom-tailored suits, and sudden golf habit with the guys from work. During my fleeting visits home, Jude entertained me with amusing corporate stories, though names and context often blurred together. "Richardson sure keeps you busy, I commented one night after Jude dismissed a call from a colleague. "Yeah, it's nonstop, but that's life in this industry," he replied. As he detailed his latest high-profile case, Jude's face glowed with vigor and pride. The shadow of resentment and defeat I had watched haunt him these past years finally lifted. My husband had returned, though in an unexpected form. With our careers firmly stabilized and finances on the rebound, I optimistically hoped our marriage, too, could now begin healing. Surely this new upward trajectory marked the end of our relationship woes. Or so my naive heart believed at the time. But unbeknownst to either of us, an unpredictable storm brewed just over the horizon, one that would change the course of our lives forever. I quit. Jude's fork halted midair, a bit of egg dangling precipitously. "You what?" I took a deep breath, grasping my mimosa tightly. "I quit my job as of today." Jude slowly lowered his fork to the plate with a gentle clink. "I don't understand. Why would you quit without discussing it with me first?" "I know, I'm sorry," I replied. It was an impulsive decision, but the timing felt right. I went on to explain my growing disenchantment with the corporate rat race, the endless slog of meetings and metrics, losing sight of any real purpose. And then an email landed offering me a lucrative freelance financial writing position. Before I could overthink it, I resigned. Jude rubbed his temple, processing this bombshell development. I braced myself for criticism over my rash choice. "Well, I support you," he finally said. "I know how miserable all that travel made you. Just promise you won't become some starving artist now," he added with a wink. I laughed, relief washing over me. "I make more per hour now than with a salary. We'll be fine." In my euphoria over dumping my corporate shackles, I failed to notice Jude's smile not quite reaching his eyes. Over the next few months, I settled happily into my new remote freelance role. The flexible schedule afforded me time to pursue photography and pottery classes, long-neglected passions. With Jude frequently working late, I cherished reconnecting with these creative interests. One evening, while crafting a vase, Jude arrived home unusually early, and not alone. I turned to find an immaculately dressed elderly woman clutching his arm. "Alara, meet my mother Mara," Jude announced. "She'll be staying with us a while." I froze, struggling to process this unexpected guest now surveying my clay-splattered apron with thinly veiled disdain. Jude had never once mentioned his mother coming to visit, much less live with us. "Wonderful to meet you," I managed faintly. "How long exactly was a while?" In the uncomfortable days that followed, I learned Mara's husband had recently passed away after a long illness. According to Jude, the loss left her too fragile to care for their suburban home alone. I empathized with her grief, even as her imposing presence invaded our home. Mara scrutinized our apartment with pursed lips. The modern artwork, my orchid garden, Jude's beloved jazz vinyl collection. Everything seemed to offend her traditional sensibilities. Without asking, she rearranged furniture to allow proper flow, and stocked our kitchen with bizarre health concoctions. Worst of all, Mara's constant, unsolicited advice infuriated me. She critiqued my writing career as a flighty pastime, suggested I dress more modestly, and outright condemned the premarital intimacy Jude and I shared, in our own home. I urged Jude to intervene about his mother's behavior multiple times, but he merely shrugged, responding, "It's just her way. She means well." As Mara's presence infiltrated each room like an invasive species, I sensed my sanctuary dissolving. Lying awake at night, I listened anxiously to Jude reassuring his mother through the thin walls after every minor stressor. The man I once considered my closest confidant now reserved that role for the intruder down the hall who eyed me like a troublesome child. And somehow I had allowed this. The passive husband and domineering mother now controlled our home, while I willingly relinquished my power just to keep the peace. The realization churned a growing fury I could no longer contain. The shrill ringing of my cell phone jarred me from sleep. I fumbled groggily for the device, Jude's name flashing urgently on the screen. "Hello, Jude?" "Alara." His voice was strained with a chilling edge I'd never heard before. "The police just left. Get back here now." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone, my groggy mind racing through possible emergencies. Sirens blaring past my hotel had awoken me just an hour ago. Were we robbed? Surely no mere household mishap warranted Jude's cryptic tone. I hurriedly dressed and raced home, pacing tensely as the Uber crawled through early morning traffic. I arrived to find an eerie quiet, no signs of forced entry or robbery. But the acidic scent of bleach hung cloyingly in the air. I moved cautiously through each room, ledgering the undisturbed valuables with confusion before noticing the bathroom. Harsh fluorescent light spilled into the hall from the ajar door. Inside, I gasped to discover blood smeared across the newly scrubbed tile walls. The metallic stench overwhelmed me. I clutched the doorway in horror. What had happened here? Just then Jude emerged, his shirt and hands still speckled with scarlet stains. Upon seeing me, his mouth twisted into a snarl. "There you are. This is your doing," he hissed, jabbing his finger toward the lurid scene. "I told the police what really happened, even covered up your rage tantrum, but if you ever lay hands on my mother again—" "What? Jude, I just got home. What on earth are you saying?" I cried. His bizarre accusation made no sense. But before I could plead further, Mara appeared behind Jude's shoulder, an exaggerated slump in her usually ramrod posture. "I tried so hard to keep the peace between you two," she whimpered pathetically. As Jude comforted his clearly unharmed mother, their distorted narrative finally registered. They had concocted this elaborate scene to frame me as unstable and violent. My hands curled involuntarily into fists as I marched toward Mara, ready to confront her deceit. Sensing imminent confrontation, Jude swiftly positioned himself between us. "Officer Costas allowed us to handle this discreetly, since Mother isn't pressing charges," he said. "But he assured me they'll be keeping close watch." I opened my mouth to refute Jude's outrageous threat, but stopped short. Their determination to paint me as an aggressor was suddenly clear. Engaging would only legitimize this infuriating fabrication. Without a word, I turned my back on them and retreated outside to calm my spiraling thoughts. Over the next week, Jude and Mara carried on with their fraudulent charade. She wore a wrist brace for her sprain, while neighbors and Jude's colleagues received anonymous warnings about my concerning temper. My existence became an endless gauntlet of thinly veiled antagonism and betrayal. Soon after, while enjoying a rare solitary afternoon, the doorbell's obnoxious chime broke my focus. I opened it reluctantly, worried Jude had forgotten his keys again, only to find an unfamiliar gentleman clutching a thick folder. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Anthony Giles, Social Services," he stated. "I'll need to speak with you about the incident on the 16th. Before I could protest, he stepped inside, flicking open his folder dramatically to begin his interrogation. As Mr. Giles bombarded me with patronizing questions, implying my guilt, fury and frustration welled up dangerously. But I knew reacting emotionally would only legitimize his suspicions. So I calmly recounted my factual innocence despite his transparent agenda against me. Fortunately, he left empty-handed, but warned further outbursts would involve children's services regarding my ability to safely parent. Shutting the door firmly against his retreating back, hot tears finally spilled down my cheeks. The realization crashed over me. To save myself, I had to abandon this house of lies. No matter the cost. I awoke well before sunrise, Jude's whistling snores grating in my ear. Slipping silently from beneath the sheets, I tucked my pre-packed bag by the front door and contemplated my next move. Today was the day. I would finally confront Jude about the cruise brochures and love poems stashed in his gym bag that confirmed my worst fears. For weeks, an unshakable feeling in my gut whispered Jude was having an affair. When traces first surfaced, I rationalized them away, not yet ready to destroy our already fractured bond. But the mounting evidence now demanded action. As I brewed coffee, I had no intention of drinking. My mind raced through potential scripts for the impending confrontation. Jude often left his work phone unattended on the counter, my chance to gather final proof. When I heard the buzz of a new text notification, my pulse quickened. I tapped the phone gently, stomach churning as the lock screen preview exposed everything. Lurid messages from a contact named Lola Peach filled the screen, leaving nothing to doubt. As I scrolled in horror, hot tears spilled down my cheeks at the graphic descriptions of past rendezvous and enthusiastic plans for reconnecting post-cruise. In that moment, something severed deep within me. The tenuous threads still clinging to hope or denial now snapped entirely. I backed away from the damning device, resolve cementing. Today the pretense would end. I busied myself with mundane tidying, awaiting signs of life from the bedroom. Before long, Mara emerged scowling. News of my resignation last week from the volunteer board she convinced me to join had earned persistent cold shoulders. "Morning, Mara," I offered politely. Her responding sneer said everything. As she shambled off to the couch, Jude finally surfaced. I steeled myself for the showdown ahead. "Jude, do you have a minute to chat?" I asked as casually as possible. He glanced at his watch distractedly while gathering work items scattered around the kitchen. "Can it wait, babe?" "Big presentation today," came his dismissive reply. In the past, I would have uttered a timid, "no problem," before sending him off with a forced smile, but not today. "I'm afraid this can't wait," I said, firmly blocking his path. "We need to discuss your upcoming cruise and Lola Peach." I watched the color drain from his face. "What are you talking about?" he sputtered unconvincingly. "I don't know any Lo." "Save it," I snapped. Months of suppressed rage now roared loose. "I'm done with your lies. I saw the disgusting messages you left open on your phone. How long did you think you could keep screwing this whore behind my back?" His lips pressed into a rigid line. Before he could reply, an anguished wail erupted from the couch. We turned to see Mara stagger toward us, heaving with dramatic sobs. "I can't bear this cruelty," she cried. "Jude, she's set on destroying this family over pure fantasy." Jude rushed to comfort her, while casting me an icy glare that screamed, "How could you upset my mother this way?" In past arguments, Mara weaponizing her emotions could shame me into silence, but her histrionic meltdown only hardened my resolve now. Without another word to either of them, I stepped outside, slamming the front door with an earth-shaking finality. As my Uber sped away, I grasped the full reality of what I was fleeing, a pathological narcissist twisted by jealousy. Her weak-willed puppet son, so easily manipulated. Their toxic delusions threatened to subsume me completely. Well, not anymore. Today my emancipation began. In the weeks following my dramatic exit, I immersed myself in dismantling the intricate web of lies Jude and his mother had woven. Meticulously documenting their misdeeds became my obsession. I dodged Jude's endless calls and texts, ranging from righteous indignation to desperate pleas for reconciliation. Responding emotionally served no strategic purpose. Instead, I quietly retained cutthroat attorneys and private investigators, methodically building irrefutable cases of infidelity and slander. With my evidence nearing courtroom-ready status, I decided the time had come for a final confrontation on my terms. I invited Jude and Mara to meet at a posh restaurant downtown, sending the address anonymously to pique their curiosity. Right on time, I spotted Jude entering with Mara clinging possessively to his elbow. Good, they took the bait. Allowing them a few minutes to settle uncomfortably at the table, I finally made my entrance. "You actually came. Bravo," I announced acidly, relishing their shocked expressions at my abrupt arrival. Without waiting for a response, I opened my briefcase and theatrically flung 2 manila folders onto the tablecloth, their damning labels clearly visible. Folder 1, Infidelity. Folder 2, Emotional Abuse and Slander. Jude visibly paled while Mara's razor-sharp eyes narrowed. "Whatever nonsense this contains holds no weight," she scoffed. "You always were drama queen." Ignoring Mara's delusional barbs, I focused intently on Jude. The folder contents will speak for themselves, but allow me to summarize. For the next excruciating half-hour, I calmly detailed Jude's long-running affair and sexting habits backed by photographic evidence, private investigator reports, and credit card receipts. Mara sputtered baseless denials until Jude finally admitted guilt in a choked whisper. "Well, she drove you to it," Mara shrieked. "A wife should meet her husband's needs to prevent wandering eyes." Slamming my palm violently on the table, I cut her repulsive tirade short. "You will not defend his behavior. He is a grown man responsible for his abhorrent choices." Turning my glare back to Jude, I continued. "And according to the investigator, Lola Peach is just one of several women you've maintained relations with." Jude hastily tried placating me by questioning the ethics of hiring spies, but my bone-chilling stare silenced further protests. After a few moments, I resumed my diatribe by exposing their slanderous hoax, portraying me as violent and unstable. "I have signed affidavits from the responding officers and social workers strongly disputing your perjured claims," I concluded, shoving the paperwork toward them contemptuously. Watching Jude visibly withdrawing into his seat like a scorned child while Mara seethed quietly was profoundly satisfying. I rose calmly from my seat, gathering the damning evidence now scattered across the table. "Consider this your one warning to cease spreading vicious lies about me to salvage your shredded reputations. I still have ample ammunition left if necessary for courtroom proceedings." Leaving them speechless amidst the upended wreckage of secrets and lies, I strode briskly towards sweet freedom. The bindings tethering me to their dysfunction now dissolved fully. I was finally free. Watching the moving truck disappear around the corner, I sighed deeply. The bittersweet pang of signing the divorce papers just hours earlier still lingered, but any residual heartache faded, standing here on the curb before my very own food truck, its cheerful teal paint gleaming brightly in the afternoon sun. My hard-won independence never tasted sweeter. In the 18 months since I confronted Jude and Mara with their deceitful transgressions, much had changed. With an excellent attorney's help, I leveraged the extensive documentation of Jude's philandering against any sympathy for Mara's fictitious abuse claims. The judge took a dim view of their elaborate hoax and utter lack of remorse, as he deemed in the divorce proceedings. Stripped of his polished veneer before the court, Jude acquiesced quickly to my terms, eager to avoid further public scrutiny. The settlement awarded me full ownership of our lavish apartment and 75% of all remaining assets. Jude slunk away in disgrace to lick his wounds, Mara in tow. She had attempted clinging to false reconciliation promises, but I wouldn't be moved. In the quiet aftermath, I blossomed in solitude's fertile soil. My writing career flourished now that energy formerly spent tiptoeing around volatility could be channeled into professional and personal growth. I traveled widely, cultivated new friendships, and most importantly, I cooked. Having rediscovered my passion for fusing flavors during darker days, I began hosting pop-up dining experiences from our apartment. My culinary skills, coupled with charming hospitality, quickly attracted a cult following. Soon, devoted patrons clamored for my signature roasted duck confit tacos and cardamom creme brulee well beyond makeshift dinner parties. When the owner of a failing food truck approached proposing partnership, the universe seemed to align perfectly with my entrepreneurial visions. I invested a chunk of savings into revitalizing the charming little hut on wheels into a truly eye-catching mobile kitchen. Bold teal paint and twinkling string lights attracted droves of curious admirers from the outset, but perhaps most satisfying was discovering genuine romance unexpectedly. During my first promotional photo shoot for Alara's, I clicked instantly with the talented photographer Graham over sharing travel tales while scouting locations. Our coffees afterwards kindled into deeper connection. Unlike Jude's love bombing, Graham's affections grew steadily out of genuine compatibility and mutual respect. On our recent trip celebrating the new truck launch, Graham mused the stunning vineyard views looked ideal for a small, intimate vow exchange someday soon. My heart fluttered hearing this wonderful man, with no ulterior motives, speak so earnestly of our future together. Just then, my reminiscing was interrupted by the loud rumble of the first guest's arrival, my dear friend and unofficial catering assistant, Eva. She had proven an invaluable pillar of support when other fair-weather friends scattered after my dizzying descent from corporate executive's wife to scandalous tabloid feature. I embraced her warmly. "Well, no backing out now," I joked. "Did those glowing Instagram stories I sent over pique your interest?" "Are you kidding? I've been craving duck tacos all week after that preview." She laughed. "Now stop keeping me from that sublime food and go wow all these strangers." Grinning broadly, I fired up the grill with infectious enthusiasm. Tonight marked the genesis of my hard-won new existence, one defined not by toxic gazes or dancers hiding in the wings waiting to step on broken dreams, instead Possibility and autonomy shone brightly, their rays feeding seeds for whatever rich future I chose to cultivate next. One scrumptious taco at a time.